Dan Pierce is a film producer and screenwriter, owner of Ramshackle Pictures and producer of the Forest series Heartwood, and he's put together a special 5-minute film sequence that will be airing in the background while you roll along, right?
That's
Yeah,
it.
okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. So my name is Dan Pierce. I'm the director of Heartwood. I first started conceiving of this film in 2012 when I was sent to Cortez Island to report on a brewing conflict between the community on Cortez and logging company Island Timberlands, who owns a lot of private managed forest lands on the south coast, and they were targeting the last few pockets of old growth on Cortez, and the Cortez community wasn't having it. And so they started organizing, generated a petition with over 7,000 signatures, which is a lot considering only 1,000 people live on Cortez, but eventually Island Timberlands showed up on the island to try and log, and one person saw their trucks and got out in front of them and laid down in the road, and that one person turned into a whole community of people coming out, making coffee, standing around the fire, singing songs, not allowing Island Timberlands to access their private forest lands. I rushed up there, I did a bunch of filming, and we sent the footage to the media. They generated a whole bunch of press coverage, and Island Timberlands got so much bad press that they backed off, and it's 7 years later, and they still own those lands, but they have not come back yet. So I knew that this was not the end of the story, though, and what really kind of hooked me was not that they were staunchly anti-logging, but that they had a different vision for how to manage the forests of Cortez, and they had been advocating for 20 years for a community forest on the island, and shortly after this episode, they actually obtained a community forest in full partnership between the Klahoose First Nation and the Cortez Forestry Co-op, representing the non-Indigenous population on Cortez. And that community forest, their whole vision was to do ecosystem-based forestry in the truest sense, to manage the forests of Cortez, to generate local jobs, but to protect the ecosystems that people rely on, to protect the watersheds, to protect the old growth, and to protect all the many values that people depend on in the forests of Cortez, and to do it in partnership with the local First Nation whose territory they all shared. And I have followed this story for the past several years, filming their operations on the ground. This is not their logging here. This is actually in the Port Alberni area here. In following this story, it has also led me to other parts of Vancouver Island and the South Coast where, just the worst kind of large-scale industrial logging is happening, and where watersheds are being logged on a massive scale, and where communities are starting to come together and realize that they're not alone, and starting to find links between each other and coordinate with one another. I've walked through the forests of Sonora Island with residents there who, fighting Timber West. I've walked through the valleys of the Alberni Valley with people there, people in Port Renfrew who have successfully defended some of their ancient forests for tourism values. So the Cortez Island vision is not a new one. You're actually surrounded by so many brilliant minds here, and people who are really showing you that there are other ways to do forestry. I just spent the day at Wildwood and learned about Merv Wilkinson from the directors of the Ecoforestry Institute Society, and that's a really amazing resource that's just 40 minutes up the road. So I really highly recommend you go check it out if you haven't been yet. I'm here as a resource for you. I'm going to keep documenting your story as well as all of the rest of these stories that are part of a much bigger story of communities waking up and realizing that we're part of these forests, and that people co-evolved with these forests for tens of thousands of years, and we got to figure out our place in this ecosystem as well. So thank you.
Dan Pierce.
Thank-